The testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ is strengthened by our history. President Gordon B. Hinckley once said, "I knew a so-called intellectual who said the church was trapped by its history. My response was that without that history we have nothing." The truth of that unique, singular, and remarkable event is a pivotal substance of our faith. After the deaths of Joseph Smith and his brother Hyrum, Mary Fielding Smith, Hyrum's widow, brought many of the Smith family artifacts west to the Salt Lake Valley. Since that time, they have been passed down to each succeeding generation. Patriarch Eldred G. Smith, a direct descendant of Hyrum Smith, now has these artifacts.
I'm Hyrum's great-great-grandson.
He's the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son, the oldest son of Hyrum Smith, and I tell him it makes him awful old.
I passed 96 last January.
And nobody ever asks how old I am, but I'm not that old.
For many years, Eldred Smith and his wife Hortense have traveled throughout the church with these artifacts, giving firesides about the reality of the restoration. As we view Hyrum's Nauvoo Legion rifle and sword, or Lucy Mack Smith's dinner bell, or witness for ourselves the box that held the gold plates, one thing is certain: seeing these remarkable artifacts brings to life the history of those who were there at the very beginning.
Definitely gives you a tie to the family, and that you know that your ancestors gave all that they had, gave their whole lives for the church.
Brother and Sister Smith invited a few close associates into their home for a rare opportunity to view the artifacts and visit with them about the Smith family story.
We're delighted to be here today to bring you the story of a most remarkable family, a very prophetic family, a family that the Lord chose to be the host family for the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. This family of Joseph Smith Sr. and his wife Lucy Mack Smith, who had 11 children. 9 of them grew to maturity, and 8 of them lived to have posterity. All of those children were born in Vermont, except 2, and they learned very early to love one another, to care for one another, to be concerned, stick together, and to work very, very hard. The family ultimately moved into western New York, and most everyone knows that their third-born living son, Joseph Jr., went into that grove of trees and had that incredible, remarkable experience where he saw God the Father in person and his Son, Jesus Christ, in person, and they spoke to him, and he spoke to them.
Though only a 14-year-old boy, from the moment he first told his remarkable vision to a local minister, intense opposition followed. Joseph wondered why an insignificant farm boy like himself could stir up so much excitement. The Bible said that the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. But everyone told him such a vision couldn't possibly come about today. But his family reacted very differently.
From the time he came out of that grove with that unbelievable story and told it to his family, first to his mother and then to his siblings, they all believed. If my 14-year-old brother had come out of a grove of trees with that kind of a story, would I have believed him? Would you? I don't think so. Not unless you'd been prepared. And it's my contention that every member of this Smith family was prepared in one way or another to play the role that they had to play.
Every member contributed somehow to help Joseph. Some even risked their lives. Once, Joseph's brother William came home to a mob of men that appeared in every direction. William flew into a fury. He seized a large handspike and cleared the men out of the chamber, and then single-handedly scattered the mobs encircling the house, all the while exclaiming, "Away from here, you cutthroats, or I will be the death of every one of you." Mother Smith, who had been praying in a corner when William arrived, wrote that they seemed to believe him and fled in every direction. Another night, during the translation of the Book of Mormon, Joseph saw a mob coming for the plates. He quickly wrapped them in cloth and stuffed them between his little sisters, Catherine and Sophronia, who had just settled into bed. The brave little girls lay still as possible as two from the mob searched the room, even under the bed, but left empty-handed.
Not only did this family believe Joseph, but they all revered him as a prophet. And you know, that's a little unusual in our recorded religious history. Will you remember with me what Nephi's brothers tried to do to him when he was declared a prophet? 4 times they tried to take his life, and it took a heavenly force to stop them. And then you go back to ancient Israel and think of Joseph. What did his brothers do to him? They threw him in a pit, declared him dead to their father, and sold him off to a foreign country. Not so with this Joseph. He had a family who believed and were nurtured and cared for so that they would stay with him and honor him all the days of his life. They honored him as a prophet. And then they were prepared by their mother and father. I brought a little symbol of that nurturing that they received, especially from their mother, with this little handmade footstool. This little stool was Lucy Mack Smith's footstool. I'm sure she rested her tired feet on this many, many times. And I can't document it, but I like to believe and think that more often than not, all and each of these children, including Joseph the prophet, sat on this little stool at the knee of their mother as she taught them about God, about life, and about being faithful to one another, of being a family, of being united. And so this little stool has a special significance as she rested her tired feet on it. Joseph's relationship with his mother Lucy is a spectacular one. He often counseled with her. He would get an assignment later on from the heavenly messenger, and he would often go to her and ask her advice and counsel as to how he could best go about to fulfill that responsibility. We have some evidence that he showed her things that he did not show to anyone else. First of all, she was worthy to be the mother of this great prophet, plus the fact that she could weld that family together. Do you know what that is, to try to make those kids love one another when she's got one boy that's so spectacularly set apart? And then I suppose that the relationship we have heard the most about, it's the most forefront in our perception of this, is that of Joseph with his older brother Hyrum. Hyrum and Joseph. Oh, you want to read what the prophet said about Hyrum? Is that in the Doctrine and Covenants?
Yeah.
About Hyrum?
Mm-hmm.
You can't believe his feeling for Hyrum.
In one of the most notable statements Joseph made about Hyrum, he said, "I could pray in my heart that all men were like my brother Hyrum, who possesses the mildness of a lamb and the integrity of Job, and in short, the meekness and humility of Christ. And I love him with that love that is stronger than death."
Now Hyrum was not quite 6 years older than Joseph, but he too revered Joseph as a prophet. It was always Hyrum that Joseph turned to when he needed someone he could really trust. And whenever he would have to be away from the church for any length of time, he would leave Hyrum behind with the injunction that he was to stay there, be stable, keep the church together, give it leadership, and move it on to its destiny. And that was true from New York into Kirtland, and then from Kirtland down into the bitter, bitter days of Missouri, where Joseph and Hyrum and others were incarcerated in those dirty, vermin-ridden jails for 5.5 months, and during which time over 10,000 of the saints would be literally evicted from their homes under the eviction notice of the governor of the state, some of them having to leave in the night, having to walk the frozen wasteland of Missouri in that bitter winter of 1838 and 39, and finally across the Mississippi, sometimes on the ice, into the little town of Quincy, Illinois, where the people of Quincy opened their homes and succored them and gave them a help as refugees.
During those dark days of Missouri, Hyrum's loyalty to Joseph was unwavering. When they were arrested and put in fetters, a railing crowd gathered. Some would race up and bite them viciously. 4 men rushed upon them and leveled their rifles, intending to shoot. Hyrum recounts that the assassins' arms became suddenly unnerved, and they dropped their rifles and slunk away. Hyrum's loyalty to Joseph withstood the ultimate test when at Carthage jail he chose to die rather than leave Joseph's side. It had been 3 years since the first vision, and Joseph was wondering how to proceed. As he prayed, a messenger appeared by his bedside, calling himself Moroni. In the course of their all-night interview, Joseph was shown in a vision a hill where an ancient record written on gold plates was deposited. The vision was so distinct that he had no trouble finding the place the next day.
We all know that Joseph went his first visit to this hill Cumorah, this hill we call Cumorah. His first visit there, he went right directly to one stone. He didn't go hunting around and finally finding the right one. He went right directly to it. And only the center of the stone was protruding through the ground. So he scraped the dirt away from the edges and pried up this stone, which turned out to be the stone lid of a stone box. There in the stone box lay the gold plates. Just as he went to reach in to take them out, this heavenly messenger, who called himself Moroni, appeared again and gave him all over again verbatim the exact same message he'd given him 3 times over during the night, and then again that morning, now again in the field, and now again the 5th time, within hours, the exact same message. They had told Joseph he was to prepare himself with a chest with a lock and key, and then return for further instructions exactly 1 year from that date.
When Joseph uncovered the gold plates, the tempting thought came that they would be worth a lot of money. As he tried to remove them, he felt a shock through his body. He tried again and again, but each time was shocked with greater severity until his strength had failed him. In anguish he cried out, "Why can I not obtain this book?" Moroni explained that the record could only be obtained by faith and not to accumulate wealth.
So without even taking the plates out of the stone box, he pulled the lid back down onto the box and returned home, and that evening, and for several evenings following, the family all gathered together after dinner, all sworn to secrecy, while Joseph told his family a very interesting story. And his mother records those occasions this way. During our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, their mode of traveling, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly, as if he had spent his whole life among them. We who read the Book of Mormon recognize that's the story of the Book of Mormon. You might ask yourself, where did Joseph get all of that detailed information when he hadn't even taken the plates out of the stone box, let alone read them or translate them or study them?
We know that while Moroni spoke, panoramic visions were opened to Joseph's mind. Clearly, his training as a young prophet was intensive. Records show that he was visited by at least 35 angelic ministers. It is little wonder he knew so much. Joseph had waited a year as instructed and went back to the hill Cumorah. This time he was allowed to remove the plates from the box.
Then his record, he says, an unhappy thought passed through his mind. There might be some other valuable treasure in the box he should not leave there for some other passerby to come and pick up. And so he set the plates on the ground at the side of him, reached in to see if anything else in the box, pulled the lid back down the box, and turned to pick up the plates, and they were gone. Imagine the feeling that came over him. He looked all around and back into the box, and they were not there. In desperation and in fear, he prayed. And I believe he really prayed.
Moroni then appeared and explained that Joseph had neglected a former commandment, that he was not even to let the plates out of his hands until they were safely secured.
And then finally Moroni told him they were in that box. He looked back in the box and still didn't find them. But then when they asked Moroni about them, Moroni said they were there in the box. So he turned to, when they got through the discussion, he turned to pick up the plates, and he was thrown backwards, as his mother says about, in his record too, as though someone had taken hold of both shoulders and thrown him backwards. And he was reminded to prepare himself with a chest with a lock and key, and to return again from that date for further instructions.
A year later, Joseph again went to the hill Cumorah, but still was not permitted to take the plates. Meanwhile, Joseph married Emma Hale and settled down to his normal labors on the Smith family farm. Once when he was passing by the hill Cumorah on business, the angel appeared and severely chastised him for not being engaged enough in the work of the Lord, and that the time had come for the record to be brought forth. Joseph prepared himself, but the very day he was to journey to the hill and finally get the plates, Josiah Stoll and Joseph Knight arrived at the farm to pick up their customary loads of wheat.
Mr. Knight and Mr. Stoll, who are good friends of the family, were there visiting, didn't show any signs of leaving. And so he waited till about midnight before he left. And he was leaving, he asked his mother if she knew anything about a chest that he could use. She didn't know of any, and he said, "Never mind, I can get along for now." And besides that, he took Emma with him at this occasion. Emma was dressed in her riding attire, and I find many members of the church even today are not aware that Emma went with Joseph to Hill Cumorah on his last visit. And besides that, he took Mr. Knight's horse and his carriage without his permission to go meet the heavenly messenger. I wonder if we give credit where credit's due. If you put yourself in Emma's place, Emma stayed with the horse and carriage at the foot of the hill the balance of the night alone, listening to the sounds of night and worrying like women do. And I've often said it was a good thing it wasn't my mother. She'd have gone up the hill after him. But not Emma. She waited patiently.
Joseph went up the hill to receive the plates. He also received the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate. He remained there all night, once again receiving instruction from Moroni and being warned of the coming perils of possessing the plates. All this while, Emma waited in the dark.
And when it came daylight and Joseph, he didn't come. But she still sat there, waited for him in the carriage. And when he came down off the hill, she saw him coming, and he had this bundle under his arms. Now she knew what they went for. And so she knew what that was under his arm when he came down. And this is just my point about Emma that most people don't think about. That makes her the first witness to the reality of the plates. Now, I didn't say she was a witness to she never did see them. But she knew. She was the first person besides Joseph that knew that those plates actually did exist. And I think we ought to give Emma that credit.
Joseph still didn't have a chest with a lock and key for the plates, and he feared that mobs could be lurking around the farm. So, as they rode back, Joseph looked for a temporary spot to hide the plates.
So Joseph stopped about 3 miles from home and went into a grove of trees, found a partially decayed log. With his pocket knife, he cut away the bark and hollowed out the inside of the log, and placed the plates inside the log, and replaced the bark, and thus secreted him in that grove of trees. When he returned home, he happened to come in when the men were out, but he met his mother, saw the concern on her face, and commented, "Not to be alarmed, everything's all right, for I have a key. and he showed his mother the Urim and Thummim. Most of us, as we talk about the Book of Mormon to our friends or investigators, we tell them that Joseph translated the Book of Mormon from Egyptian characters on gold plates. Then they may ask, well, did Joseph Smith know Egyptian back in those days? And then we usually counter, oh, but he had the Urim and Thummim.
The Urim and Thummim literally means lights and perfections. It is a tool for translating ancient writings, and Joseph also used it to see things that were far off. The Bible shows that the prophets Moses and Abraham had a Urim and Thummim and revealed Scripture through them. The Book of Mormon prophet Mosiah used such translators to decipher the Jaredite history.
Oliver Cowdery had learned the hard way that if you had the Urim and Thummim, it wouldn't do you any good unless the Lord wanted you to use it. And some of us think maybe if we had the Hyrum and Smith, it'd help us with some of our school work or some of our business problems or even our income tax.
Rumors began swirling about Joseph Smith's gold Bible. Joseph's father went walking from house to house to find out more. At his first stop, he overheard a group of fortune seekers who were conspiring to get the gold plates. When Emma heard of the plot, she went racing to warn Joseph. Joseph sensed that the plates would not be safe much longer hidden in a log, and was determined to get them immediately. He went to his mother for help.
In the course of their conversation, he asked his mother again what he could do about a chest. She didn't know of any. For 4 years, he'd been told to prepare himself with a chest with a lock and key, and he was still procrastinating. You wouldn't put that in the record for a concocted story, would you? And the only solution she could come up with is to have a cabinet maker make a chest. Well, that was fine. They agreed to pay for it, as they had done previously for some furniture, half the cost in cash and half in produce. But there was one catch. No one in the family had any cash whatsoever. Joseph's record says there wasn't a shilling in the household. Nevertheless, they had made the arrangements, and the Lord opened the way for Joseph to earn the money. It was going to take time to earn the money, take time to make the chest. Joseph couldn't wait. So he sent his younger brother, Don Carlos, over to Hyrum's home to tell Hyrum to please come over. He wanted to talk with him, which he did. He made arrangements with Hyrum to borrow a chest that Hyrum had that he could use temporarily till the cabinet maker made the other chest. So Hyrum went home to get the chest. Joseph went to the grove of trees to get the record. Joseph found the record safe and sound as he had left it. Then he had another experience, which I'm sure must have been for his own benefit, and must have reminded him of the last instructions that Moroni gave him. When Moroni turned the record over to him, he said, "Now you have got the record into your own hands, and you are but a man. Therefore you will have to be watchful and faithful to your trust, or you will be overpowered by wicked men, for they will lay every plan and scheme that is possible to get it away from you. And if you do not take heed continually, they will succeed. While it was in my hands, I could keep it, and no man had power to take it away. But now I give it up to you. Beware and look well to your ways, and you shall have power to retain it until the time for it to be translated."
Joseph pulled back the bark of the tree and found the plates safe as he had left them. He wrapped the plates and started back to the farm. Remembering the angel's warning, he thought it safer to leave the road and continue through the woods. He soon came to a patch of fallen trees, and as he jumped over a log, a man sprang up from behind Joseph and gave him a blow to the head with a gun. Joseph knocked the man to the ground, then ran at full speed through the thicket. About a half a mile further, he was attacked again. He overpowered the man as before and ran on. Before he reached home, he was assaulted a third time. Joseph struck the last man down with such force that he injured his hand, which he did not notice until he came within sight of the farmhouse. Overcome with fright and fatigue, he collapsed at the corner of the fence to recover.
But when he stopped to catch his breath, he discovered that in hitting the last man, he dislocated his thumb, and it was paining him quite badly. So he went on into the house and told his father and Mr. Knight, who was still there, what had happened. They went out looking for those men, but with no success. But when you dislocate your thumb, there's no imaginary conflict. It was the honest-to-goodness fisticuff conflict where it overpowered three men with his bare hands, one after the other, carried the plates at the same time, outran them a distance of approximately 3 miles. I think, though Joseph was physically a powerful man, he would agree with me that he was given just a little bit more than his normal physical abilities to enable him to arrive home safely with a record, demonstrating to him in essence what Moroni had told him: if you do your part first, the Lord will see to it that you can succeed in doing anything the Lord wants you to do. So again, Don Carlos, the younger brother, was sent over to Hyram's home to tell Hyrum to please hurry over that chest. Don Carlos was the younger brother. Younger brother always has to run errands for the older brother, doesn't he? Don Carlos about 11 years old at this time.
I've studied Don Carlos quite a little bit, and he was the youngest. He died when he was 25, but he adored Joseph. He just did everything he could to help Joseph.
Don Carlos arrived at Hyram's home and found Hyrum sitting at the table with some family and friends who had come to visit because Hyram's wife was in bed with a newly born baby, 3 or 4 days old, there first. Don Carlos walked in, just touched Hyrum on the shoulder. Before either had a chance to say a word, Hyrum jumped up from the table, ran the other room, grabbed the chest, dumped all the contents out on the floor, put the chest on his shoulder, and the two of them went out of the house on a run without a word. And the ladies commented, "What's happened to Hyrum? Is he gone crazy or what?" Hyram's wife laughed and said, "No, that's just the way he acts. Remembered something he's forgotten." But this chest is the chest that Joseph borrowed from Hyrum, in which he put the gold plates, the breastplate, and the Urim and Thummim. This chest was originally Alvin's tool chest, or what we would call in those days a lap desk. Now Alvin carved his name on the edge right here. It's not very deep, but over the years it's been rubbed till it's nearly gone. But I thought many years ago, to preserve that identification, I thought maybe I should take my pocket knife and cut it a little bit deeper. And then I was reminded of the story of George Washington's axe. 2 new heads and 3 new handles, still George Washington's axe. So I put my pocket knife away, and this is Alvin's original carving. One of the values of having this chest, it gives us limitation to size. And incidentally, most of the so-called replicas I've seen of the plates are too large to go in the chest.
Joseph describes the records were engraven on plates, 6 inches wide and 8 inches long, and not quite so thick as common tin. They were filled with engravings in Egyptian characters and bound together in a volume as the leaves of a book, with 3 rings running through the whole. The volume was something near 6 inches in thickness, a part of which was sealed. The book exhibited many marks of antiquity and much skill in the art of engraving.
The plates would fit literally in 1/4 inside this chest very nicely. And remember, as he said, they were engraved, which means that's the kind of writing you put on your jewelry. It's cutting into the metal. And if you're going to make your own mental picture of how thick each sheet would be, remember you're going to cut into the metal a little bit on both sides of each sheet.
Along with the plates and the Urim and Thummim, Joseph also kept the breastplate in the chest. The breastplate is often confused with the traditional warrior's breastplate, when in fact its function was simply as a pouch in which to keep the Urim and Thummim.
He not only showed the Urim and Thummim to his mother on one occasion, but on a separate occasion he showed his mother the breastplate, and she records it this way: "He handed me the breastplate, spoken of in his history. It was wrapped in a thin muslin handkerchief, so thin that I could feel its proportions without any difficulty. It was concave on one side and convex on the other, and extended from the neck downwards as far as the center of the stomach of a man of extraordinary size. It had 4 straps of the same material for the purpose of fastening it to the breast, 2 which ran back to go over the shoulders, and the other 2 were designed to fasten to the hips. They were just the width of 2 of my fingers, for I measured them, and they had holes at the end of them to be convenient in fastening. After I had examined it, Joseph placed it in the chest with the Urim and Thummim. And his mother said that he wore it on his person practically all the time, strapped onto his breast, under his shirt, of course, a pocket in which he carried the Urim and Thummim. And that's why, as you read the history over and over again, Joseph would come running home, change the location of the plates, just ahead of wicked men who would come and ransack the house. But he was always ahead of them because he was always wearing the breastplate with the Urim and Thummim in it, by which he was always warned any time the plates were in danger.
When Joseph showed his mother the Urim and Thummim, she took it in her hands and described that it consisted of 2 smooth 3-cornered diamonds set in glass, and the glass was set in silver bows which were connected with each other in much the same way as old-fashioned spectacles.
Her description we have to modify a little bit because she was not an authority in gems. She did not have the opportunity of close examination. And so we have to footnote her description and say they were as clear as diamond. And Joseph's description, of course, he was more cautious in his language, says they were clear as crystal. But she adds in her description, much like old-fashioned spectacles. These she would not have called old-fashioned in her day. These were Hyrum Smith sunglasses. They're quite unique in their construction. They're made to fit any size, and they have a chipped blue glass on the sides to protect the eyes from a flash of light on the side. And the front is a green prescription ground lens. And they fit any size, as I demonstrate. And they're kind of unique for sunglasses, but they give you tunnel vision. You can't drive a car with these. Ride a horse, but not a car. But at any rate, to make these look like the Urim and Thummim, remember this is not the Urim and Thummim, we get rid of the modern trim, the blinders and the temple, and then instead of a nose piece like this, it's just a bow, like a bow and arrow, just a curved bar to hold them together. Then you put a 3-cornered stone on each lens.
Joseph now had everything he needed to translate, but the constant threat of mobs and fortune seekers looking for the plates made it plain to Joseph that he could not remain in Palmyra. So he moved to Harmony, Pennsylvania, settled on a small farm, and began to translate.
Joseph started to translate and write for himself. It was too slow and arduous a process. He wanted somebody to write for him, so Emma became his first scribe.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Emma made as great a contribution as anybody did to the restoration of the gospel. She withstood the most terrible trials without ever complaining, without ever being disloyal. Imagine, the plates were in that box around the house, locked up, of course, but she had been forbidden to look at them. You can be sure she dusted that box more than once and handled it and moved it. Don't you think you might have just lifted the lid and just taken a little peek? Not Emma. She didn't do it. The fact that she could sit in that carriage that whole night alone in that terrible darkness and wait for Joseph and not go on the hill after him. I have nothing but admiration for Emma.
With the household demands placed upon an American frontier wife, Emma found little time to act as scribe. Oliver Cowdery was a school teacher boarding with the Smith family back in New York, and from the moment he heard about Joseph's story, he could think of nothing else. So he journeyed to Pennsylvania, and Joseph immediately employed him as scribe.
Imagine the confidence he had in the fact that the Lord sent Oliver Cowdery to him to be his scribe. And Oliver Cowdery took down the dictation as Joseph would dictate it to him. He'd write it in longhand with an old-style quill pen, and then read it aloud back to Joseph that which he'd written. In that slow, arduous process, they completed the balance of the translation before the end of June the same year. 3 months, less than 3 months' time, to read it aloud twice and write it in longhand. A miraculous accomplishment of itself.
The Book of Mormon was printed, and the Church of Jesus Christ grew rapidly. The saints eventually settled throughout Missouri, but the restored religion was perceived as a great threat. Joseph and Hyrum were imprisoned on spurious charges, and the governor of Missouri issued an order allowing the extermination of Mormons. The saints were either killed or driven from the state.
Well, in the spring, Joseph and Hyrum and the others were able to join the saints, and they moved up the east bank of the Mississippi River and founded what we now know as beautiful Nauvoo. Here they felt they could put down their roots. They had stood the test of Missouri, those that had survived. And so they moved on to some beautiful farms and started some beautiful brick homes, some still stand, and started a temple in great anticipation. But it was not to be. For now in June of 1844 comes another warrant for Joseph's arrest, and he's to appear at Carthage, Illinois, some 23 miles distant. As usual, he turned to Hyrum and said, "Hyrum, we need to think this over." And they decided they needed some time to think about what they should do, whether they should go west or what, just how they would face this crisis. So they sequestered themselves across the Mississippi into Iowa and began their deliberations. But they began to get word that if they did not return, the saints would be retaliated against. The enemy was not about to let Joseph slip through their fingers at this time. Those who sent some personal and private letters pleading with them to come back, they could not go on without them. Some even accused them of cowardice for having left the saints leaderless so for this time. That's when the prophet made his famous statement, "If my life is of no worth to my friends, it is of no worth to me." Once again, he turned to Hyrum and he said, "Hyrum, what shall we do?" And Hyrum said, "I think we should go back and put our lives in the hands of the Lord." And Joseph said, "If we do, we are dead men. If I go, Hyrum, I want you to stay behind, for if anything happens to me, you must avenge my blood." I believe he did not intend to have Hyrum go out and kill all the enemies of the church to avenge him. What he wanted him to do was to do exactly as he'd done before, to stay there, give the church leadership, keep it together, and move it on to its destiny. But for the first time in his life, Hyrum disobeyed his prophet brother, and he said to him, "Joseph, I will not leave you." And it was at that moment the decision was made that they would go to Carthage together. Now bear in mind, Hyrum was not under warrant. He did not have to go to Carthage, but he would not let his beloved brother face this trial by himself. So they went back across the river and went to their homes and began their preparations for Carthage. And we have a little vignette into those preparations in the handwriting of a John Smith. Now, John Smith is the firstborn son of Hyrum and his first wife, Jerusha Barden Smith. Most people have never heard of Jerusha Barden Smith. She died at the birth of their 6th child in Kirtland, and she's buried in a little lonely grave there in the cemetery next to the temple. She passed into anonymity when she died. Subsequently, Hyrum married Mary Fielding, and all of us have heard of the stories of Mary Fielding and the family as they came across the plains into the Great Salt Lake Valley. But John was the firstborn son, and he's the great-grandfather of Brother Eldred Smith, who's here with us. And because of that, he has some of his personal writings. And in those writings, we find these little excerpts. He says that on that day, meaning the day that they were preparing to go to Carthage, he saw his father come in the house and take his good watch out of his pocket and hang it on the peg by the washstand. And we have for display today this beautiful silver pocket watch, which John said he took out of his pocket and hung on the peg by the washstand. Then he writes further, he went into the other room and changed his clothing and put his older watch in his vest pocket and I have the older watch, but we handled it a lot more carefully. There's a large dent in the face of it. The face has been destroyed. That was caused by a ball that was shot into Hyrum as he lay on the floor in the jail, that was shot into the back of him, passed through all of his clothing and through his body to the front, and stopped against this watch that John said he put in his right vest pocket. He came out and said goodbye to the family. And then even more poignantly, he writes, I watched my father and my Uncle Joseph ride off down the road toward Carthage, and it was the last time they were seen alive by the members of the family.
John had already lost his mother as a 5-year-old boy. He had already been driven from far west by the Missouri mobs. Once already he had clung to his father's garment as officers hurried him away. It was as if John was that child described in the Doctrine and Covenants. If thine elder son, although but 6 years of age, shall cling to thy garments, and shall say, my father, why can't you stay with us? O my father, what are these men going to do with you?
Now there's a sequel to this story that is not usually known. It involves another brother and is another shining example of the love and devotion in this family, and most especially for these brothers for one another. Samuel was just younger than Joseph. He did not go to Carthage, but he heard that his brothers were in terrible trouble. So he got a conveyance and started off, and was met by a mob of angry men who would not let him pass. So he turned around, rode back, traded for a faster horse, this time a racehorse, and taking a more circuitous route probably, he was able to outrun this mob and come into Carthage just at almost the moment that the deed had been done. Joseph and Hyrum and Willard Richards and John Taylor were in the bedroom on the 2nd floor of the jail, and they were keeping a wary eye out as to what was going on outside. And when they saw the mob begin to move toward the jail, they tried to secure themselves. Hyrum went to the door at the top of the stairs, put his hands against it, leaned against it, must have had his head turned to the right, because when someone got to the top of the stairs, they shot through the panel of that door and struck him to the left side of the nose in the face, severing a large blood vessel, and he dropped to the floor and bled to death almost instantly.
One of the most precious artifacts is the clothing Hyrum Smith wore when he was killed. The clothing tells a detailed story of just how the sequence of events played out at Carthage.
We've laid out on the table the clothing that Hyrum changed into that day, and it's the clothing that he was killed in Carthage. Consists of a homespun linen shirt, a vest that has a back and a front lining of linen, homespun linen. The front lapels of the vest are probably boughten fabric. They wouldn't have had a home loom to have done that. And then there's a pair of homespun wool serge trousers. Not only are they homespun, but they're all hand-sewn. Every stitch in them is with a needle and thread. There was no such thing as a sewing machine. It hadn't been invented. My computer tells me it didn't come on the market till 1860. And so as you get a close look at these, you'll want to pay attention to the beautiful handwork on them. They also include and show the blood stain and the bullet holes that Hyrum suffered. And in my estimation, they tell us more about what really happened in that room that day than anything else we have. Remember, I told you that Hyrum was struck in the left side of the nose in the face, and that he had to have had his head turned. For as you look at the shirt, you'll see that the large blood stain is right in front of the right shoulder. So he had to be, as he fell and as he lay on the floor, so that in such a position so that the blood would get from here, the left side, over to the right. These are the bullet holes that were shot in the legs as Hyrum lay on the floor in the room in the jail. One on the back of the right leg, the other one on the front of the left leg. There's no blood on those bullet holes at all. Then we find a bullet hole here. Those two are identical. There's one in the back of the shirt that's the same thing only it's on the table, you can't see it. But that's one bullet hole where the ball came from behind, went through his body, and hit the face of the watch that was in this pocket right here.
The clothing tells a detailed story of just how the sequence of events played out at Carthage.
So that means he would have been leaning over, and naturally to hold the door shut, he put his shoulder against the door. So he put his left shoulder against the door this way, and the ball that came through the door, it would hit him right here. That'd be the center of the head when his head turned this way. The ball hit him here, came out below the right ear, back here, and it knocked him backwards this way. His knees had already been bent, and they'd collapse and they'd go under. When he hit the floor, his knees would be up, and they're shooting. And by that time that Joseph goes out the window, the door comes open, and the men back there are not standing up this way shooting, they're squatted down shooting at a man lying on the floor. So we get a glancing blow that comes and hits him in the chest right here. A glancing blow hits him here and comes out in this way. You have two holes, which are not round holes, they're frayed holes. And then somebody else shoots from the doorway, hits him just below the knee on the left shin right here with the knee up, and the other one with the knee up hit. How do you get one in the back? Because his knee was up and turned a little bit, hit him in the back of the thigh right here. Because that's a frayed hole, it's not a round hole at all. That hole there is actually the size of a elongated bullet. The guns were not rifled in those days, so some of the guns had long bullets, but they would tumble. And so I took a bullet of that kind, laid it on here, and it fits just exactly with a point up at this end. And that's about what happened there. One of the elongated bullets that just tumbled, hit him flat. And then somebody, of course, by this time, Joe's gone out the window. The excitement's outside. So they come through the door to the window and see the excitement's outside. They come back again, and somebody going past him, either going one way or the other, rolled him over and shot straight down on him. These are round holes, and the one in the back was exactly perpendicular from the one in the front where the watch is. So that would have come right straight through. No glancing blow, and a low-powered pistol possibly, which went through the body here, leaves round, clean holes, and stopped against the watch.
Now Joseph, seeing that his beloved brother was dead, and perhaps thinking to save the lives of John Taylor and Willard Richards, went across the room to the window, went out the window and was shot, and his body was propped against the well under the window. And we have many records that tell us that a large ruffian stood nearby with a big blade ready to collect that ransom that was on his head in Missouri. And just as that was about to happen, a great bolt of lightning hit nearby, so close that it stopped everything. Everyone just froze. Simultaneous with that light, at that very instant, Samuel rides in with this mob of men chasing him. And someone, thinking he was leading the Nauvoo Legion to avenge the deaths of Joseph and Hyrum, called out, "Here come the Mormons!" And that did it. Everybody fled. They left the scene completely. And that made it possible then for them to retrieve the bodies of Joseph and Hyrum, to get John Taylor to safety, for he'd been severely wounded, and then for Samuel and Willard Richards and others finally get the bodies back to Nauvoo. What isn't known about Samuel is that about 3 weeks before he made this ride, he had injured himself severely in his side. I believe that's probably the reason he did not go to Carthage with them. And his mother records that that day, 2 hours of arduous riding with the pounding of that saddle into that side opened it up even further. And she records that he developed a pain in his side from which he never recovered. And so Samuel, too, 33 days later, gave his life incident to the events at Carthage in trying to go to the aid of his beloved brothers. What a remarkable story of sacrifice and devotion. Samuel is not classed as one of the martyrs because he wasn't there when that happened, but he gave his life just as willingly and just as voluntarily as did Hyrum for Joseph and for the cause that they were about to set out to do. When these three men died within a month of each other, that left the family completely devoid of any menfolk except for William, who was away in the East. He wasn't even there. The father was dead. Don Carlos was dead. Samuel, Joseph and Hyrum now, and that left them entirely without any menfolk.
3 days before he was killed, Joseph had a prophetic dream. In the dream, Joseph and Hyrum are walking on a vast body of water toward the city of God. Soon Samuel joins them, saying he had been lonesome back on shore and had made up his mind to go with them across the mighty deep. So the three of them together enter the city triumphantly. Music rings from 1,000 towers, and in God's glory they are welcomed home. 5 years before the deaths of Joseph and Hyrum, Mother Smith wrote, "I was filled with the Spirit of God and received the following by the gift of prophecy. Let your heart be comforted concerning your children. In 5 years from this time, Joseph will have power over all his enemies." In 5 years, Lucy stood over the caskets of her 2 martyred sons. She wrote, "As I looked upon their peaceful, smiling countenances, I seemed almost to hear them say, 'Mother, weep not for us. We have overcome the world by love. They slew us for our testimony, and thus placed us beyond their power. Their ascendancy is for a moment, ours an eternal triumph.'"